of changes to go over, and for the better from all of our standpoint. But I'll get started with that. Load this. Let this load for you. So what's changed, Nate, is now, as of 11 a.m., a tropical depression. Has weakened fairly rapidly once making landfall. There are still tropical storm force wind gusts contained within there, but we're not seeing sustained tropical storm force winds anywhere. So they went ahead and decided to drop the tropical storm classification to a tropical depression. All of our tropical storm warnings are being dropped and replaced by a wind advisory, and they're working on that now. And so for those of you that are in the warned area, you'll see that fairly soon. And we also have lowered peak wind gusts quite a bit from previous forecasts and previous advisories that and even the email that we sent out this morning. So the current location of the center is now near Tuscaloosa, moving through Birmingham. It's going to sort of split that I-85 and 65 corridor up through northeast Alabama over the remainder of the day. So while I let this radar loop load for those of you on the other end, I'll talk. We are seeing the heavier rain band starting to move in now, and some of the rainfall totals have been impressive so far within the band. We got 34 hundredths of an inch in Polk County. We had 35 hundredths in 12 minutes in Atlanta, and we had 2.52 in 1 hour in Smyrna with this heavier band that you can see. I'll see if I can draw on here without it showing up. This heavier band that's moving through Atlanta now. Once it started, and I think the primary problem today is becoming the heavy rain in very short duration. It's very efficient rainfall producers. The good news with all of this is the heavier rain is not allowing things to destabilize, and that's sort of lowering our overall tornado threat as well. So good news from that front. It's not zero, but it is a little bit lower than what we were expecting yesterday, because we were expecting a little bit more sun to break out, but we'll talk about that. So far, we've had a gust to 30 miles an hour down southeast of LaGrange in this heavier band. Some of the stronger winds are starting to come into western Georgia now. We saw Auburn gust to 40, and we had, I think, Anniston. There's a site near Anniston that gusted to near 40 as well, just in the last 20 minutes. So this area right here is what's going to bring a lot of the winds, and that's now moving into the western part of the state, and will slowly work itself north and east as the center, which is back off the screen here. And let me go back to the lower left here. The lower left is the regional view, and you can see the low pressure here. This is basically going to track north, and as it does so, this heavier band with some of the stronger winds is going to also work north and east. So this is really our player for the day, is this heavier band as it moves east, north, and east. For those of you in northwest Georgia, you're going to have to deal with that band as well as the core that's now moving into Birmingham. This is sort of the northeast core, strongest winds, the east side, the dirty side. That's going to scrape across the northwest part of the state as the surface low actually tracks here. So you guys will be dealing with that here later this afternoon, and that's where your strongest winds are going to come from, is that the eastern side just east of the low itself. So this graphic has not been updated on their website yet. This is from the 7 a.m. advisory, but notice they had an S on here. This is now going to be a D, because the storm is now a depression. Max sustained, they're going 35, gusting to 45, maybe 50 on some of those higher winds. And we could see some higher winds in the higher elevations, and that's the thing to keep in mind here. Once we get the higher winds are off the ground, once they hit those higher elevations, it's likely we could see some of that up there. This will be the last NHC update with the depression, and it will then get turned over to the Weather Prediction Center out of Washington, D.C., or the HPC, we call them often. They're going to take over the track forecast at that point. But here it's sort of irrelevant because it's inland, and over the next 6 hours it's going to be passing by us. So for us, and for all intents and purposes, the track really is irrelevant at this point. So here's what we've got. We do have a flash flood watch. That has not changed. You can see it on the right-hand screen for basically all of North Georgia, north of the metro, including a few of the North Metro counties. That does not mean that we won't see some flash flooding potential in and around west of 75 with that stronger band. I could certainly see some isolated flooding in the area I've circled here, west of the metro, not in the watch, due to what I just told you with the 2.52 in 1 hour rainfall rates. If we continues to get any rain and pile up, we could certainly see some isolated flash flooding with that kind of rain. So flash flooding is going to be the issue of the day, at least for the most part. Now for the tropical storm warning, we replaced that, and you can see on the left-hand side, these are all of the counties that are in the wind advisory. And so we're looking at 25, 35, 30 to 40 in some of the higher elevations up in this region. I'll show a graphic that in a minute. This region up here, you guys could see 30 to 40. And then generally speaking, 25 to 35 here in this part of it. Doesn't mean that we won't see some. In fact, I was just telling you we had a gust near 30 near LaGrange, which is not even on this map further south. So anywhere in that band that's moving in, we could see gusts. But the longer duration stuff looks like it's going to be more in the north, closer to the actual surface low as it gets closer to us. So that's what we have now for watches and warnings. Here's the latest based on the 11 a.m. advisory maximum wind gust forecasts and maximum probable 20 to 30, generally speaking. Like I said, we could see some tap over 30 in the areas in yellow. Anything in yellow is 20 to 30. Once you start seeing the oranges, which are up in the higher elevations, we get 35 to 45, or for the most part. 45 would be up in the much higher elevations, above, say, 2,500 feet. But 30 to 40, generally speaking, across the north. And the area I've highlighted in red is where the wind advisory is in effect. So, again, for all intents and purposes, it replaces the tropical storm warning. So with that, because we've lowered the overall amounts, it doesn't mean that we're not going to see some downed trees. We are, more than likely, but it won't be on the widespread side, and we could also see some sporadic power outages with that, but not again not speaking in terms of widespread power outages. So somebody was asking for timing for peak gusts over the next 6 hours. Most of this is going to occur between now and 8 o'clock tonight. And for right now, in fact, for western Georgia, it's starting now, because that band that's moving in right now is where your peak winds are going to be. For northwest Georgia, you guys are starting now through the passage of the low, which is going to take all the way into the evening hours. And then for central Georgia, I-75, 2 o'clock to, say, 8 o'clock once we get the bands out. And you'll see that in a minute when I show the forecast. Rainfall-wise, 1 to 2 inches, and you can see it drops off pretty rapidly to the south and the east. Heaviest rain bands are going to be just east of where the center tracks. We got 3 to 4 across most of northwest Georgia, 4 to 5 in far northeast Georgia in the higher elevations, 2 to 3 in the I-85 corridor, metro Atlanta, all the way down to LaGrange and even Columbus. And then it drops off 1 to 2, and then less than an inch basically south and east. So if you drew a line from Athens to Macon to Americus, south and east, you guys were generally speaking less than an inch of rain, and lesser impacts overall in that sector. Most of the impacts, again, are going to be in the northwest part of the state. Here is the radar simulation, and I'll let this load because it's a loop, so it'll take a little bit longer to load on your end. But what I've done is I've highlighted an area in white. It's sort of a highlighted white area. I don't know how else to explain it. It's the highlighted area. That is where the Storm Prediction Center has sort of an elevated risk for tornadoes. Should we see any instability, the risk would go up. But right now, it is on the lower end of the scale, and it would be more like a marginal risk per se. But nonetheless, we are seeing some rotation in the storms, and I'll show that in a minute where we have the highest shear, and that is basically in the area that's highlighted in white. that is the highest shear area. So if we can get any kind of instability, it wouldn't take much to get something to spin up. And we'll talk about tornadoes in a minute. But this is the radar forecast. You can see the heavier band moving over us now, and then the forecast for it to shift east through the day. And then by this evening, most everything is out of the area, and we may have, I'll call it a tail. You'll see this heavier band. This is what's moving in now. It's going to shift through the day to the east, and then clear the state by 6, 7 o'clock tonight. And then there may be this trailing band right, there's almost always something like this when the storm tracks to the northeast, a trailing band that hangs back. And some of the models are trying to hang that back, which would be nothing more than rain or steady rain over a relatively small area or a thin area, not very wide, that we'll have to watch for, because that could create some additional flooding problems if a tail does want to hang back with the storm. So models are hinting at it, but it's not a guarantee at this point. But as you can see from this, most of the action is during the day today, and by 7, 8, 9 o'clock tonight, most of the state has been cleared for the most part of everything. So we'll see things start to wind down by this evening. In terms of the tornado threat itself, this was the tornado watch on the left-hand side that was in effect till 11. They were going to let this one expire, and this bumped up almost to the Columbus border. They issued a discussion, which you can see on the right, and I've done the best I could to highlight the state of Georgia in black here. It's hard to see because there's a lot of stuff going on. But what they highlighted was in the red circle was where the best instability was, and in the blue area, it was where the best shear was. You can see it wasn't aligned. If this were aligned, we'd have a bigger problem, but we don't. Most of the instability is to the southeast. We have the best shear over Georgia, over northwest Georgia, which is kind of where I was highlighting there on that last slide. And this is what we'll have to watch, because if we do destabilize at all with this amount of shear in, we could see things spin up pretty quickly. So that's what we'll be keeping an eye on during the day. But for now, based on their discussion, they're not anticipating a replacement watch, and that is until we start to see more destabilizing across North Georgia. We're not expecting a tornado watch, at least at this time. So good news on that front, but we're not out of the woods by any means. So in summary, Nate has weakened significantly since landfall. The warnings, the tropical storm warnings, have all been replaced by wind advisories. We could see max wind gusts 30 to 40 in the higher terrain, with 20 to 30 miles per hour in most other areas. Again, mostly in those bands as they move in. 1 to 4 inches of rain with higher amounts across North Georgia, especially northeast Georgia in the mountains. So that, and I've already talked about some of the rainfalls totals we've seen, 2.5 in 1 hour. So certainly capable of producing flash flooding, especially if it persists for any longer period of time. We can't rule out tornadoes. I know it's a little bit lower of a risk because of the instability, but we can't rule them out in the outer rain bands. But for now, there are no watches in effect. And conditions should improve, again, later this evening after, say, 8 o'clock, overnight into Monday morning, with only the possibility of maybe some rain associated with the tail of the storm as it's moving away. And so some heavy rainfall by morning, but all of the wind, everything else should be gone by late this evening, and things will calm down. So with that, let me jump over to the questions. If you have a question, you can type it in the chat room.